All right, so I thought I'd take just a couple minutes to talk about the film review and to really think about what types of things that I would expect for you to have in the film review that would really make your film review better. So primarily, you can think of the film review as not being so much a review you read in the paper that's telling you whether you should go see the movie or not. Because the film review is more about thinking about critically what is the purpose of the film, what emotions or what sort of ideas does the film emote, and what do you walk away with at the end of the film. Also, what was the filmmaker thinking about and trying to convey by creating this film at this time? So there are really a couple of questions that we ask when we do a film review. First, we talk about, what is the content of the film and what does the film tell us about this story? Because in reality, films sometimes tell stories differently. You can take the same exact story and changing the script and changing your camera angles, you could tell a completely different story with completely different message to it. The other thing we would talk about is what is the filmmaker's perspective of the Civil War? So in some Civil War films, you're going to see more of a glorification of war, whereas in other Civil War films, you're going to see a demonization of war. Sometimes war is about the major battles, and sometimes war is about individuals. And then in the end, sometimes it's about the famous people, and sometimes it's about average people. So all these things are going to create a different opinion about how the filmmaker or how the screenwriter has created the message about war. Then you always want to connect it back to something that you read about in Battle Cry of Freedom, because Battle Cry of Freedom really is our text that serves as the main idea behind what's going on in the Civil War. And James McPherson really tends to present somewhat unbiased. I mean, obviously it's a northern perspective, but he doesn't really present it with a hatred for the Confederacy. Whereas you might see in some films, there is an undercurrent of hatred for the Confederacy or the Union, depending on how the filmmaker made the film. And then finally, the fourth question, which is probably the one that confused people the most, what is the style of film used by the filmmaker? And the major ones that I point out with historical films are a historical documentarian, philosophical treatise, and generational reflection. So really simply, all three can exist in a film. Don't feel like you have to pick one and say the other two don't exist in the film, or that I think that some films overwhelmingly are more one than another. And that's why I point out as three different perspectives you can put in a film. But simply, the historical documentarian is the battle is being recreated or the story is being recreated to tell the story. And you get a lot of this in 1950s World War II films, where the whole point is to entertain. It's not so, there's a thin veil of a background love story or some friendship story, but it's really not teaching you anything. It's just sort of advancing the plot through some smaller stories. Then you have this concept of a philosophical treatise, where almost the story doesn't even matter. It's all about the people. And you get films, a lot of war films actually. Apocalypse Now is a great example, where it's so completely character driven. It doesn't even matter where they are in the film. It's all about what the characters are thinking and how they're interacting with each other, and what it's telling you about human sort of instincts and emotions rather than even war. And maybe it's talking about war in the sense of how war can corrupt. But it's not really, it doesn't matter that it's in Vietnam. It could be set any war. It could be set any generation. And that's really what makes a philosophical treatise. And the third is a generational reflection. And, obviously, again, a movie like Apocalypse Now as an example, it's about Vietnam. It was made, a little bit after Vietnam. But it really is a generational reflection. A lot of the movies about war, especially Oliver Stone, who made films about Vietnam, really it was very generational, and to make a movie about Vietnam today is going to look different than people who were experiencing Vietnam at the time and seeing it live. Just like, even though Saving Private Ryan, as a second example, even though Saving Private Ryan had a good feeling that comes out of it, the overall opinion of most filmmakers about Saving Private Ryan is it took sort of a 1950s perspective on big battle movies, but it also was a philosophical treatise because it talked a lot about human emotion and friendship and connections, and that almost was the major story over the war. So as you're writing this film review, don't get bogged down by one or the other. What I want you to think about is, don't just think of a film as being entertainment. Sometimes when we look at a film just for entertainment value, we lose the sight of small things that we would have ignored had we just been looking at it for entertainment value. So really a film review is meant to make a film out to be more like a book than it is just a movie. And that's why we call it a film rather than a movie. It's, it's all semantics. But the goal of this assignment is to really get you to critically analyze a film, to think of it as being a piece of educational literature almost, rather than just something you watch because it's interesting. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me before the end of the week. I will accept it up to Friday for full credit. If you get it to me later, again, it's points off. But I really want you to take time to think about the different elements of the film review rather than just rush through it and get it to me by the end of the day. All right? So if you have any questions, please let me know.